Sunshine State. This is Tampa Bay's Tan Talk.
It's time for FLALAW, brought to you by the personal injury attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. This hour will be informative, along with taking your questions and comments. Now, here are your hosts for today's show.
Good evening. It is Tuesday at 5 o'clock, and that means you are here listening to FLALAW on the radio. We are live for the next 1 hour to answer any questions that you have regarding the law. We are also here to, talk about the law a little bit, especially today we're going to be talking about some of the new laws that come into effect in Florida. But before we get started, let me just give a little introduction to our show. We are FLALAW on the radio, sponsored by the law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. My name is Matthew Noyes, and I'm one of the attorneys at the law firm. And my co-host, Lorrie Robinson, is here too, and she's one of our attorneys as well. So Lorrie and I are here to answer any questions you have. We are the oldest, longest established personal injury law firm in Tampa Bay. We started helping people after personal injury matters in 1955. So this year, we celebrate our 70th birthday. And what better way to give back in gratitude for our community trusting us for so long is to provide this radio show to you. Each week we come live to really be available to answer any questions that you have. You may have a question that you just don't want to have to pay an attorney or spend a lot of time with an attorney. Just to get your one question asked, and that's why we're here. So give us a call. You can do it many ways to reach us. You can call us at 727-441-3000, and we'll take your call live on the air. Or you can go to the firm's Facebook page. We are live on Facebook right now. That firm's Facebook page is Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers. Just jump on there, type in your comment right there, and we'll be able to answer the questions that you have or address your comments as well. And there's one other way, the third way you can get in touch with us, and that is through our YouTube channel. We are live on YouTube right now. Again, that's Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers on YouTube. Ed's on the other side of the glass. He'll be looking at that, and if there's a question that pops up that way, he'll be able to send it on over to Lorrie and myself, and we'll be happy to tackle those questions as well. So without further ado, Lorrie, thank you very much for coming again.
Always happy to join you.
You are a wealth of knowledge, and I know our listeners love to hear from you. And so thank you for taking an hour of your time to come in and chat with our radio audience. Lorrie, you and I were talking, it's July 1st. I think on January 1st, we did the show, or close to January 1st.
I think we did, actually, now that you say that.
And we talked about all the new laws that came into effect on January 1st. Well, it's July 1st, and so that means there's new laws coming into effect again. Believe it or not, 120 new laws came into effect today in Florida. And so we thought we would talk a little bit about what those new laws are. Many of them I didn't even know.
Right. I actually, when you introduced the idea of this topic, it was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know either.
Yes. And so we are going to talk about the new laws, but as trial lawyers, I think it's only fair that we also talk about what's up and fresh, especially in the last few minutes on the news. We have a news feed here, and it says that the jury reached partial verdict in Diddy trial. Now, we do civil litigation, which is different than the criminal litigation. But, Lorrie, can you kind of just talk to our listeners a little bit about the jury system, and it's a partial verdict and such?
And when we were commenting about this, it reminded me that actually you and I have had in a civil case what's called a hung jury.
Yes.
So in the Diddy case, that's a criminal case, and so apparently the jury has been able to reach a verdict on quite a few of the counts, but not.
I think not on the racketeering count.
Right. So in that situation, the judge will likely bring the jury in, and then we'll give them a special instruction that essentially asks them to go back and really try very hard to reach a result. So this is kind of a little touchy area because you can't. It is each juror has to make their own decision.
Right.
And so the court has to be a little careful about creating undue pressure. But there is the other aspect that obviously if there is an inability to return a verdict on one of the counts, then it creates the likelihood that there would have to be potentially another trial on that count. And so
I was going to ask you that. I mean, I think there's 5 different or 6 different counts, and they've reached a verdict on 4 of them, just not on the
Right.
first one.
Right. So that would not.
They don't have to retry the other ones that
No, they
reached
would
the
not have
verdict
to
on.
retry the ones that there was a verdict on. But depending on the legal issues, if there's an inability to reach a result or a verdict on one count, there could be a lot of appellate issues that arise out of anything the judge does here, really,
Sure.
including from the perspective of the defense lawyers, potentially putting pressure on the jury or whatever juror is having difficulties reaching a conclusion. So I say that because I was in my early years, first decade of my career as a lawyer, I was a public defender down in West
Yes.
Palm Beach, and I've always loved criminal defense. It's something that's kind of in your blood. But what it illustrates, and I love what we do. We have, many times I'll tell clients, our system is, it's human. There are all these problems with it, but it's still the best in the entire world.
Sure is.
And it does mean that in a civil situation, if you have a civil dispute, such as we represent people who have been injured as a result of an auto accident or maybe a slip and fall injury or a workers' comp incident, it does mean that there's a way to resolve those disputes. And that goes back to the founding of our country and the concepts and the principles that we have had established for us, actually going back even to the English common law in many instances. But we're very, very fortunate. And of course, in a criminal case, they do have to prove the case beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt. I will say that when I went into civil practice, I would come home and visit my mother, and I would always talk about all my cases. And at one point she said, Lorrie, those criminal cases sure were more interesting. Because obviously the criminal cases, most of us enjoy watching something on TV or a movie, and they do always have an element that is typically maybe a little more dramatic than what we would experience in the typical civil case, not always,
Right.
but obviously for the individual plaintiff that we would represent, that's a very, very important case. And thank goodness
Sure.
we have the ability, if we cannot get a case resolved, most of them are settled, but if we can't, then you have the opportunity to go before a jury of your community
Right.
and seek justice. And, we're happy to say very often obtain it.
Right. And I think that the news is saying that the judge may have to give what's called an Allen charge. And the Allen charge is really just telling the jury to, hey, go back there and try again to
Right.
try to come to a conclusion. And so there's not a hung jury.
Right.
And
Right.
if there's a hung jury, they have to decide whether or not to try it again. And as you alluded to, we had a hung jury in one of
Which
our.
is kind of unheard of in civil
Yeah.
cases. I remember,
Yeah, why don't you tell our listeners? I mean,
Yeah.
that was quite the adventure, that's for sure.
Oh,
I mean,
my
that
goodness,
case was
yes.
tried or set for trial at least 3 or 4
Yes,
different
this
times.
is one aspect of the system that's very frustrating for people. So we had a very nice client who was injured in an automobile accident, and the case we had it scheduled for trial. Literally, it was 3 times. I remember there was one time when I remember that our judge could not make it back he was visiting Czechoslovakia, and they had
Oh, that's right.
closed
I forgot that was
European
the reason.
airspace because of like a fire, volcano, or I don't know what it was, but he had no way to get back. He was on a family vacation or
It
something.
was the volcano. I forgot about that. Yeah.
And that was pretty wild. And then we may have had another time when we just didn't get reached. And then we finally get the case before a jury, go through the whole trial, which, these cases typically, and this one was like that, 4 or 5 days,
Right.
and then the jury gets the case, all the instructions of the judge. And there was, you're not allowed to talk to the jury even afterwards. That would all have to be supervised with the court. So you don't know exactly what happened, but the jury can reach out. And I think we did have a couple later on that did, but there was apparently a juror that just couldn't bring themselves to render a verdict.
Well, she ran out of the room, the jury room, while we were in the courtroom.
Yeah.
And saying that she just couldn't do it. She just couldn't do it. And so it was.
I do remember there was a
quite the
lot
adventure.
I don't remember that specifically. Isn't that funny? It was quite a few years ago now, but I do remember that we could tell there was a lot of heated conversation you couldn't exactly hear what they were saying, but in the jury deliberation room. But none of the lawyers, and we were all very experienced. The defense lawyer was a very, very experienced lawyer. None of us and the judge had ever had a situation where in a civil case, the jury could not come to a decision.
Right.
Now, in that case, the same thing would have occurred that is occurring in this criminal case, because the judge would have and did read a instruction encouraging the jurors to go back and try to reach a decision. But the lady, now that you say that, I do recall that. That was pretty fun.
And the reason why she did, for our understanding, is that she thought it was the defendant, the at-fault driver.
Yes, now that reminds me.
Having to pay the judgment.
And what had happened, now she wouldn't have known this, but the other reason the case got continued is he actually did have some sort of a health issue.
Right.
Now I recall. But and so people don't realize that even though insurance is virtually always going to be involved, I mean, as a practical economic matter, a case isn't going to be brought unless the party has insurance, auto insurance, like you have to cover yourself.
Bodily injury liability coverage.
But in that situation, the jury cannot be told that out of concern that maybe they would more freely award larger verdicts or whatever it would be. But so here, this lady was looking at a sympathetic appearing care, and of course, in an accident, obviously, it's rare that you have somebody that is truly. I mean, they don't mean to cause the accident, but that doesn't mean that that they're not accountable if they're negligent and cause injury, which in this case that occurred. And we did eventually, as a result of all that, get the case settled after all those efforts to get it tried. But it was really something.
It was very costly. And that's one thing about trials, is that it can be very costly to take a case to a jury trial.
Yes.
We have to have that discussion with clients on a regular basis of, okay, let's take it all away. You and I, we love doing jury trials. You're a board certified civil trial attorney. And so we enjoy doing jury trials, but it's only if it's in the best interest of the client.
Right. Because
earlier this morning, there was a problem in that case to where the foreman sent a note saying one of the jurors is refusing to follow the judge's instructions. What does that mean?
Yeah, I saw that too. I think that was yesterday, actually, is when they were doing that. The judge gave certain instructions saying, and I think he had 4 or 5 instructions. And what it was you can't do your own investigation. You have to rely on the testimony. You can't use race involved in your assessment, and there was a few other ones too. And one of the jurors came back and said that this one juror refused to follow those instructions. And the judge doesn't give a lot of instructions per se. They give jury instructions.
Right. That's kind of unusual even to have had something that specific, although certainly reminding the jurors that they cannot look outside of the evidence that they've heard.
Right.
Now that creates a situation that no matter what happens, the defense is probably going to have if it doesn't go for the defense. Now, if it goes for the defendant, if he's found not guilty, that's that. There could be, if they don't reach a verdict on the one charge, then he could be looking at retrial on that. But let's say he gets convicted of something. That juror's inability to participate as they are required to is going to infect the whole case and most likely create the circumstances of a mistrial, good arguments for the defense.
Right. And apparently it was just like an hour after deliberation started is when the problem arose. And the alternate juror would have been the one who stepped in. They would have dismissed that juror, and they would have an alternate jury come in. Can you tell a little bit about, in Florida, it's a little bit different than.
Yeah, they can differ in different states.
I think this is federal. Yeah, that's federal.
Right.
So it's a little bit different, but in Florida, there's in a civil case, how many juries?
Yeah, we would have 6 jurors and an alternate usually. And in a criminal case, they probably have 12 jurors, and there would be alternates, probably a couple of alternates maybe. But and that would be a circumstance if, again, pretty big problem if you've got a juror. We would, the judge would inquire as to what the details are privately, but that would be the solution. Typically, it would be a situation where somebody becomes ill or something and cannot complete their service, and then that's why you have the alternate there.
And many times the alternate doesn't know that they're the alternate.
That's true.
You
That's
know,
true.
we've had, when we go to our jury trials, they listen to 4 days of testimony. They spend a day or however long deliberating with the rest of the jury. And then they all come back to the courthouse and the judge says, okay, jury number 7, you're the alternate. Thank you very much. You can go home. And it's like, wait a second.
That's true. And sometimes they want to sit
Right.
and watch
And
to see what's happening.
We've had people stay and watch
Yes.
too. So,
Oh, yeah.
So that's pretty interesting.
Oh, yes.
So if you have questions, I'm Matthew Noyes. This is Lorrie Robinson. We are here live on Tan Talk. You can give us a call at 727-441-3000. Jump on our live Facebook page at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers. Send us a question that way, or jump on our YouTube. There's 3 ways to get in touch with us. So if you have a question or you want to make a comment about the Diddy trial or the new laws that we're going to talk about, this is your time. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be a comment. We're happy to listen to your thoughts and your comments about the judicial system, the new laws, and such like that. So, I mean, Lorrie and I can talk forever, but
that's true.
But
lawyers are very verbal.
But this is your radio show, and so if you have comments or thoughts, please feel free to join in. But before we take the next call, let's talk about the new laws. One was something that I've heard about, but I didn't really know it was going to be a law. And in Florida, effective today, state agencies are required to change references to the Gulf, from the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America.
There you go.
And starting on July 1st, public and charter schools may only acquire instructional and library materials using the term Gulf of America instead of Gulf of Mexico.
Well, I guess because there's been a little bit of pushback from some people on that. And, the president has the authority to do this. And as a matter of recognition of national, our history and pride, that sort of thing, I guess is the rationale behind it. Maybe there are others, but it's a little hard to get used to, right? Because it's been the Gulf of Mexico. I'm a Florida native, but I get it. I mean, it is really the territorial areas associated with the United States really are associated with America. So, all right.
It could be a little confusing though. If one state would have the books that say Gulf of Mexico, and Florida will have the books that say Gulf of America. Which is probably why
these changes have to be made, because I don't think any state or agency is at liberty to say, well, I don't like the idea.
Right.
I mean, it is a matter of a federal prerogative, I guess, through whatever agency and his executive orders. So
yeah, but this is a Florida law. This is a Florida law that's been passed.
Making sure that it's fulfilled.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we'll have to get used to that, right?
We will.
We don't want to violate the law.
I'm going on a cruise, and I think I'm going out to the Gulf of Mexico, but apparently I'm going on the Gulf of America.
It'd be kind of interesting to kind of declare what it is, because if you're going down to like Cozumel or someplace,
that's right.
At some place you probably would cross into the Gulf of Mexico, because probably I don't know how our boundaries and go out. There's a certain 3 miles or something.
How about the Gulf of America?
There you go. I like that one. That'd be a good one. That's a good compromise. I like that. So another law that's been talked about a lot is the fluoride ban.
Yes.
You and I talked about this afternoon. Is you and I grew up with fluoride in the water.
Right.
Now it's not allowed to add fluoride into the drinking water.
I did a little background on that after we had talked about it, because I'd heard several things. I mean, there are questions by some people that health effects of the fluoride. So there are some issues about that potentially. But the other thing was the law itself really just eliminates the ability to use things that do not actually address water quality. So It's not mentioned by name, but it is not something related to water quality. So it has the effect of banning that and maybe anything else that.
So any other chemical, not just fluoride, if it's not water quality.
Yes, but it has been one of these things where, there have been some questions about it. And I was saying that my own personal study, I've never had any cavities. My brother had plenty of cavities.
He's going to love to hear that.
they both, we had the fluoride in the water. And I did read something up that the CDC, their statistic was that it reduced dental decay or whatever, like in 25, I don't know how they would actually do the study, but in 25%. That doesn't sound that great.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think my brother and I, we conducted the study. So now, obviously,
that's 50% right there.
yeah,
See?
if you want fluoride, obviously you can get it in toothpaste and all that sort of thing. So it's not like people can't utilize that if they think it's helpful.
Right.
And I actually have no opinion on it, really. I don't know.
Yes, we'll see if the water tastes any different.
That's true.
I know my brother, he as you know, he used to own pizza places. And up in Chicago, he had wonderful pizza crust. It was just delicious. And he opened up a pizza place down on the beach, and the crust just wouldn't taste the same. And he said it was because of the water.
Wow.
The water in Florida prevented the crust from being
Which is
a good pizza crust.
Yeah, and I mean, he would know. And I'm used to it, so I would have no idea.
He imported the water from Illinois in order to make his pizza crust. So it was pretty cool. All right, so those are two laws that kind of people are like, oh, I did hear about those things, but I didn't know it was going to be a law. But another law that came into place, which I think is a very good law, that comes into effect as of today, is called the Dangerous Excessive Speeding Law. Mm-hmm. And really what the law says is that it creates a criminal offense for quote unquote dangerous excessive speeding. And that is defined as if a driver is exceeding the speed limit by 50 miles an hour.
That's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad. Yeah. Or operating a motor vehicle at 100 miles an hour or more. So if you're driving 50 miles over the speed limit or 100 miles an hour, you're putting not just yourself at risk, you're putting everybody else on the road at risk. And we deal with people all the time that get hurt because of some crazy driver.
Right. Now I can think of some tragic cases that now I guess they must think because that you would, if you drive that fast, that much above the speed limit, that would certainly be reckless driving and other things. But I guess the idea of giving a criminal penalty associated with it, something that would draw people's attention to the fact that this is not optional. You just cannot do that.
Right. For the first offense, the violators could face up to 30 days in jail and a $500 fine.
Yeah.
And any repeat offender, that means if you're caught within the 5 years from the first one, it's up to 90 days in jail, a $1,000 fine, and a driver's license suspension for at least 6 months.
Wow.
Anything that can be done to make the roads more safe. I mean, you and I, we deal with, wonderful families that's lives are forever changed because of somebody being careless. Now, it doesn't mean they have to be going 50 miles over the speed limit or 100 miles an hour. There's careless in other ways too.
It's so easy. I was thinking, that's of course egregious.
Right.
But a part of it is, people don't really think about, you get in the car, you can be an automatic pilot. As I was driving here, I was driving down Belcher to Northeast Coachman because you and I take opposite ways.
Yes.
Sometimes I beat you, sometimes I don't. Today I did. Yeah, but there's a little strip center area right at the corner before you get there. This person pulls right out in front of me, doesn't even see me. Now, I saw him, obviously. I also saw he had a big dent in the side of his car, and I thought to myself, well, I know how that happened.
Right. That's funny because on the way here, right by Jack Russell Stadium, there's a two-way stop. And I don't have a stop sign, but the cars to the left and right of me do. The guy just pulled out right in front. He had the stop sign. I didn't. And it was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, so that illustrates the importance of driving defensively, looking for the things that people can miss, basically, because they miss things all the time.
Right. We have wonderful clients that get hurt, not because of their actions. Mm-hmm. They could be the safest driver in the world. It's the other drivers that are not paying attention, distracted, speeding because they're trying to be cool or just trying to get someplace. We had a tragic case where a whole group of guys were speeding in a car and one died.
Right, essentially hot rodding. It was a neat car, and you're very good, decent, nice people. No way in the world, and it was just something that person wasn't thinking, and exposed everybody to a tremendous horrible thing. So that's one thing I would say. Because we deal with this all the time. I mean, it's easy for any of us to be an automatic pilot and not see things, but looking around and really just look for the things that might be a problem, like those stop signs or people pulling out of parking lots.
Right.
Even in parking lots like at a Publix or a grocery store, we've had several accidents that were darn significant accidents.
Right.
Just
right, because people aren't paying attention.
yeah, they're focused on getting home with their groceries or whatever.
Now, I scold my son for driving 5 miles over the speed limit. So I can't
5
imagine.
miles.
I can't. No. It's still the law. It says the speed limit. It doesn't say the suggestion. So I can't imagine. I can't imagine going 50 miles over the speed limit. That's crazy.
There's the problem, because we know that in fact it's actually hard not to drive with traffic and be my own limit. But of course, we should always adhere to the speed limit, but no more than 5 miles.
I agree with you. I mean, I can drive down from Countryside Mall on 19 when now there's no traffic. I mean, no traffic lights.
Right.
You can catch yourself going 70, 75
Easily.
miles an hour and not even knowing it, because you're just trying to, and you're still getting passed by all the traffic.
And there's somebody right on your tail. I think how crazy.
But since my son's not listening right now, he doesn't know that I have gone 75 miles an hour on US 19. But another new law that came into place, which I didn't even understand this, but apparently before today, adults applying for a driver's license didn't have to take any tests. Now they have to, if they're applying for a driver's license, they have to complete a traffic law and substance abuse education course.
An actual course?
A course, yeah. So they didn't have to take
it.
They had to take the test.
But not a course.
Yeah. Now they're required to take the course.
Mm-hmm.
And so
for a new driver, I guess, basically.
An adult driver.
Okay.
I mean, I have one of my nephews is in his 20s. He's never driven.
Right.
And so
he'll have to take that
He'll have
class,
to take the course. Yeah.
Which makes sense. I mean, really.
Yeah. But also for safety, it's teen drivers. Now there's mandatory driver's education.
I think
the new law says that teens between 15 and 17-year-olds will be required to complete a state-approved driver's education course before they can get their learner's permit.
Right. I think that's
a
very good idea. Yeah.
They had a course that they had to take, which was the traffic law and substance abuse education course. But this course that they're requiring to take expands that, and it expands it to include safe driving habits, distracted driving, and those types of
I think it's
behavior.
Good. My father taught me to drive, but before I got my learner's permit, I went to the Dixie Safe Driving School or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but it was, I think there's probably a value in everything you can do, particularly when, you're young, you have no real experience on the roads. And our roads are a lot worse today than they were when I was coming up.
Sure.
The traffic is just
and she didn't go to Dixie driving because of the name Dixie. It was well, maybe you did because your dog wasn't Dixie at that time.
Not at that time.
No,
but the Dixie driving stuff was like an old.
Oh, I remember
style.
it.
Yeah,
yes.
right.
Yeah.
But now my mother's nickname was Dixie because she was born in Lakeland, and so that was the South. So that was her nickname or whatever. But I think I went to it because that was the one that was around.
That's right. And now Dixie stays with you because your Dixie D is your
my
dog.
little Cocker Spaniel, Dixie D, and is in the newsletter. Of course, gives all those pointers along with her brother.
Very
Ricky.
smart dog.
Yes.
And her brother Ricky Jr.
Ricky Jr. aka RJ.
Yeah. Yeah. So all right. So those are the two driver's license things that I thought were interesting. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's going to be more education required in order to get a driver's license, which I think is good.
It's good. And that's it's add expense for people. Right. So they're but honestly, with our traffic, it makes all the sense in the world to do what we can to really make sure that a young driver is actually ready. And I would say, although your parent may be good, sometimes it's a little better to have somebody else kind of do the supervision.
Right.
You don't have the dynamics of the parent-child situation.
Yeah. And when I briefly researched this new law, I think they said that the new course for the 15 to 17-year-olds can be taught at the school, at the high school level.
Oh, good, because they used to have that. They probably still do.
So, I think they still do it. They're just requiring this new course, this more structured course, which so it'll still be free.
Oh, that's good. No, that's very good. That's good because that would be a problem.
Is there still a physical driving test anymore?
There is actually. You still have to take a physical.
But I don't think people have to learn to parallel park.
I don't think they have to parallel park, but they still have to do a 3-point turn, if I understand correctly.
Well, that's pretty hard.
Yeah. But parallel park now there's cars you just hit a button, it'll parallel park for you. So
That was really-
Nowadays, they could probably do all of it for you. Not in my car. But again, I'm Matthew Noyes. We have been talking for about 35 minutes now. Lorrie Robinson's here as well. We are live on the show talking about some new laws that come into effect in Florida today and into the future. We are live, so give us a call if you have questions, 441-3000, or on our live Facebook page at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers, or on our YouTube channel as well. 3 ways to get to us. Let us know what you think about these laws, and any other comments you may have regarding the Diddy trial or anything else that you may have. If you missed this episode or you missed prior episodes, we are also posted our past episodes right on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts and other platforms that you can have your podcast. So subscribe, listen to the old ones, and again, you'll have access to send us questions even on the old ones if you wish. But Lorrie, let's get back to the new laws that come into effect, and one of them is called the Pam Rock Act. And that Pam Rock Act is named after a postal worker who was killed in a dog attack in 2022. Now it says that owners of dogs deemed dangerous are required to microchip their pet, secure them, and maintain at least $100,000 worth of bodily injury liability insurance. That's something new.
Now, is that for... what are the
you have to be a dangerous dog.
Okay, it's been
and so I
hard,
said,
yeah.
okay, what's a dangerous dog?
I was thinking about that, right?
And so I did look it up, and it's not a new definition. It's always been defined in the statute of what a dangerous dog is. And a dangerous dog means any dog that, according to the records of the appropriate authority, A, has aggressively bitten, attacked, or endangered, or has inflicted severe injury on a human being, on public or private property. B, has more than once severely injured or killed a domestic animal while off of the owner's property. Or, this is the one that my sister would really say is always a dangerous dog. Or C, has, when unprovoked, chased or approached a person upon the street, sidewalk, or other public grounds in a menacing fashion or apparent attitude of attack.
I'm very concerned about that one as well, because as I read that, now I have, as you know, I have Dixie D. She's about to be 13 in August. So she's a sweetie. And then little Ricky Jr. is just a little over 2, and he's a sweetie too, but he's 19 pounds of little boy. And when I take him out, now I always have him securely on lead, but if he sees a bicycle go by, he's barking up a storm and he wants to go. And I'm thinking, wow.
But is he doing it menacingly or is he doing friendly?
Well, he would not actually menace anyone, really.
Right.
But
a biker could think so.
Right. Because if you were looking at him, I mean, he's like my neighbor next door. So, well, I might as well get it over with. So, of course, I let Ricky Jr. go to, and he's fine. It's not, but he's being a dog, right?
Right.
Now, there would be situations, obviously, there are dogs that actually would be a problem, and Ricky would in no way be a problem. But it also illustrates for the owner. When I read that, I thought, wow, if you, because I've often thought if I let him off lead, which I'd never do, I mean, he'd be like that,
right.
And he'd be off in a minute. And so people do need to be careful, because a lot of times the owners of dogs, we all love our dogs and we perceive our dogs as perfect, which they may be with us.
Right.
But unless you've really socialized, and even then you can't know when you're dealing with strangers. So it kind of illustrates for a dog owner, you really, when you read that, like your sister-in-law was saying or whatever, it's like many dogs would fit that seeming definition. Now, in reality, obviously, the real situation is a dog that's actually truly menacing someone, but
what are the requirements? I mean, the requirements that if you have a dog that fits in that definition, well, you have to microchip them. Well, you should do that anyhow.
Right.
You secure them.
That's the main thing.
Well, you should do that anyhow.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
And then maintain at least $100,000 worth of liability insurance.
Right.
Well, that protects the owner.
It does. And particularly in situations, I will say this, when I take my dogs for a walk, I mean, they wouldn't harm anybody, but there are a lot of people that have dogs that are breeds that while they may be fine with the family, they're breeds that do have more of an aggressive tendency.
Right.
And that means it's very important to protect your dog, yourself, with the proper insurance and all of that. But really be sure you have your dog under control.
Right. And those are the two laws now. So if you have a dangerous dog, there's a law that says you have to microchip them, secure them, and maintain some liability insurance.
And you would never really want to get to the place where there would be on record the types of things they're talking about here. That would be just terrible, because it's disaster if you have to give up your dog. That would be the awful thing. That later on, I know there's some other new laws related to protecting dogs, pets.
Right. I was going to talk about that.
Good.
In fact, that's the Dexter's Law.
Mm-hmm.
Dexter's Law is named after a shelter dog that was brutally killed in Pinellas County days after it was adopted. So somebody adopted Dexter, and he was brutally killed. So the law enhances penalty for aggravated animal cruelty, including a 1.25 sentencing multiplier, while also creating Florida's first animal abuser database.
Oh, wow.
To prevent abuse and protected communities. I think that's good.
It's very good, because a person, not only, is it terrible to harm another living thing, but the truth is that a person that would do such a thing, they're going to have other problems, unfortunately, because that to be that way and to harm an animal like that, that's kind of a red flag.
And without the database, the next animal shelter would never know.
Right.
So I think that's a very
so
good
it protects the animals, but it also is information that puts a red flag out on somebody that is not necessarily just a risk to animals.
Right.
I would
No,
say.
I agree.
I mean, that
if you're
comes from my
gonna
old
do that to an
public
animal,
defender.
you're most
Right.
likely going to
There's
have other issues.
there's a little something going on there that is not balanced.
Right. And then there's another law that came into effect, and it may be the same law, but it's called Trooper's Law. And Trooper's Law was inspired by a dog. I don't know why it's Pinellas County all the time, but Trooper's Law was inspired by a dog that was left chained up in the path of Hurricane Milton.
I remember hearing about that.
And was rescued by Florida Highway Patrol last year. Trooper's Law makes it a felony to restrain and abandon a dog during a declared disaster or evacuation. Punishable up to 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine.
Wow. Yeah, and it was pretty outrageous. I remember hearing about it, and the governor drew a lot of attention to it because it was awful.
It was. I mean, if the dog is actually a family member, you're not going to leave a family member chained up.
And it's just a matter of respect.
In a storm coming.
Respect for all creation.
Right.
I just think it really is unfortunate that you'd even have to even think about passing a law to set standards on something like this. But.
Right. And the law also codifies penalties for failing to provide confined animals with sufficient food, water, and exercise, or abandoning animals that make those misdemeanors. Yeah. So there are some good laws that come into effect that really help animals, protection of animals, but also help people that may be harmed by animals. So I think that's really good. Another set of laws that I want to really talk about is there's several of them that really talk about education. And one of it is the cardiac emergencies. The new law, Florida House Bill 1607, requires school districts to provide basic first aid training, including CPR, in secondary schools as part of a PE or health class. The instructions must allow students to practice performing CPR and learn how to use an AED. Wonderful. In addition, each public school must develop a plan to respond to incidents of sudden cardiac arrest. And by July 1st, 2027, schools must have at least one AED on school grounds. Lori, can you tell the listeners, I mean, we know what an AED is. Can you tell our listeners what that is and why it's so important? And what kind of history do we have in something like that?
When we saw these particular changes in the law, it was very heartwarming because the AED is the defibrillator that is actually available at fire departments and in most public facilities. We have one at our church and schools.
Right.
And unfortunately, you'd like to think that young people, they're healthy, there's no issue, but there can be very serious issues of being involved in a sporting event. And we represented a wonderful family quite a few years ago now.
Yeah.
Probably would it be 20 years now?
It could be.
Yeah.
Could be 15, 20 years.
Yes, because the case actually went to a trial in 2011. I remember because
Yeah.
that was an important year to me. But and the case had been around quite a long time. But it was so tragic because the families, they lost their young son, who was a high school student over in Tampa.
Baseball player.
Yeah, and he was unfortunately involved in athletic training for the baseball, as I recall.
Quote unquote conditioning, preseason conditioning.
Yeah. Yeah,
and he had a heart attack.
He had a heart attack, and in that particular case, they I think they had an AED, but there was nobody knew how to use it.
Right.
It was present but completely unavailable, and he died.
Right.
And had there been an ability to respond quickly, because when this happens, you only have a matter of a few minutes to save the person.
Right.
But if you have an AED, there are pretty good chances you can save the person.
Right.
So what's fascinating and wonderful about this, we know that our family went to Tallahassee, and I think they were very involved in getting laws passed to try to make sure you do have the AED
and a sporting event. I think that's what the law that the family was able to get was that there was an AED for sporting events.
That's right.
Because
there was one at the school, but nobody even knew where it was.
Right.
Yeah, right. So to have it, so it's really available.
And so out of tragedy, this wonderful family was able to protect other people because they went up to Tallahassee and really petitioned and worked hard to get a law passed in memory of their son,
yes,
who was a wonderful Cubs fan.
Chicago, right?
Yes, and to get the law passed to protect other high school athletes.
Now, what's happening now, and I'm doing a little background reading on this. We know in life you try to do a good thing, and that was a very good thing that the parents were able to accomplish. But it was just one step along the way to actually getting to a system that really would be there to help people. And what they're doing now, and it's the first in the nation, is to have the laws that have been passed now that are going to require the AED and the training, and what you were just talking about. But I think
the Second Chance Act is a brand new act that, you and I, this matters to us because we've lived it. We lived it for many years. The whole cardiac issues in students and preconditioning and practice and all that. Well, the Second Chance Act is something I never heard of until I prepared for today's show. And that is Senate Bill 1070, which was passed into law, requires students to complete at least one EKG who wish to compete in any sports, and requires the Florida High School Athletic Association to prohibit students with abnormal EKGs from participating in school sports unless a written medical clearance is provided to the school. Wonderful.
Yes.
You get EKG is not hard to do. It's not invasive by all means. It should be a standardized test that an athlete should want to know anyhow, especially if it's a high schooler. And I think that's a wonderful
that's
law.
Huge because it's just so easy to miss things like that because the child seems healthy, et cetera. But there are a significant number of episodes that occur that, having had that background diagnostic test, would prevent a student that doesn't have any business being involved in the training from participating
and getting checked out. You know, this may be something silently going on that they don't know about. And so just trying to be participating in some sports may bring that to light and may really be beneficial to not just the child, but also to the whole family.
Absolutely.
So I like the Second Chance Act. I think that's a good law that was passed. I like the cardiac emergency law. I think that's a good law that's passed. But another law having to do with education is banning phones in schools.
I think it's a great idea, but I bet that one's not going to be popular with.
I know. Florida lawmakers approved a ban on students in elementary and middle school from using cell phones during the school day.
Which I mean, for those of us old enough to have experienced life without cell phones, and I love my cell phone, we all are semi addicted to them, of course, because they're very useful and interesting. But for young children, I think it's great. And I noticed, I guess they're really talking about just up through 8th grade or something like that.
Up through 8th grade, and then they have a testing on the idea for high school students.
Right.
But the high school students right now, I think the testing is you can't use it during the instructional periods of time, but you can bring it to school and you can use it during lunch and in between classes, apparently. But from what I read, elementary and middle schoolers, it's a ban from cell phones throughout the whole day.
I mean,
from bell to bell.
I can imagine, there certainly could, for emergency purposes, but there are ways to provide for that if there was a need to.
Right. And I think that's what I think it's what it said. There are some concerns raised about student safety, but the law allows for exceptions and requires schools to develop procedures for those emergencies.
Yeah.
Also, an exception is that if they need it for a disability or individual educational planning.
Right. So you could see things like that. But generally speaking,
IEP plan.
I think it's a very, very good idea. But, people have different opinions on those kind of things. But I believe that would be helpful to young kids.
My son, who's 19 now, didn't have a phone until he was 16 years old. So I wouldn't have a problem saying no phones in 8th grade.
Right.
But there are some situations where parents will say, well, I need to have my child have a phone, especially if they're doing after school activities.
Yes.
That they need to call me and let me know
Right.
that
It's something
they're
like
ready
that. I could see.
Forgot something. But what happened if you needed to call your parents during school when we were in school?
Right.
You went to the office
Right.
and you used the phone.
Yes.
It's not that you can't call your parents.
Right.
You can use the office phone to make sure that
We
happens.
did get through all of that. Yes.
Yes. And one other last thing about education, the new law. Apparently, several years ago, there was a law that said that required public schools not to start before 8 a.m. for middle schoolers and not to start for high school till before you couldn't start till after 8:30. Apparently that didn't work out too well. So before that even came into place, there's a new law today that says, well, what we're going to do, we're going to let the school district come up with a report to substantiate what time they think these schools should be starting.
Now, I don't know. So what, do you know what the issue is there really as far as start time?
I think it had to do with busing, timing of buses and such like that. I think some of it had to also do with they wanted to get out early before it got really hot during the afternoon on the schools that don't have air conditioning.
Right.
I can't imagine going to school
today
without air conditioning, but there are a lot of schools in Florida that don't have air conditioning. And so I think that's part of what it was.
I'm trying to think, because I went to Northward Elementary. Now, I don't know if it has air conditioning now, but had the big windows and all of that. So I would wonder, because it would be very costly, I imagine, to
well, think about the old courthouse. Remember the old courthouse?
Right.
Guy Perenich and Bob Carroll used to talk about how they used to have to do a trial in the old courthouse. And they had those huge windows.
Yes.
And they had to wear their suits, and they put on trial while wearing a suit. And, and I think that was kind of I walked uphill in the snow both ways.
Right. For
kind
Florida,
of thing.
it's like being in the heat, the humidity of the heat.
Yeah. And so we'll have to see. We'll have to see really what the school start times are nowadays. Another thing that I thought was interesting, a new law that came into place. We all know about silver alerts and amber alerts. They have something that I think is really good. They established what's called a spectrum alert. And that's a statewide alert system to help find missing children with autism. Under the law, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement has until 2026 to get the alert system up and running. So I think that's a good system too, because
seems like that would be good.
Some of them with autism, it's very important that they are found quickly because of water. They're attracted to water. We had a very sad case where one of our families, their son drowned in the neighbor's pool.
Oh gosh.
And he was autistic, and they're just drawn to the water, and unfortunately he drowned. So anything that they can do to find any missing children, I support, and I think it's a wonderful thing. Now, I'm not a boater. I don't think you're a boater either. Are you?
No,
Not
I've
much
been
of
on a
boater.
boat before, but that's about it.
Yeah. But now there's a new law, and it's the Boaters Freedom Act. And I suspect some boaters, some boat captains would love this new law, because now law enforcement officers can no longer stop boaters solely for safety or marine sanitation equipment inspections.
Yeah, sounds like
without probable cause.
Right.
So it's
freedom on the Gulf of America.
That's right. That's right. There you go. So you're getting used to that. It's pretty good. Safety inspections are now a secondary offense. Violators of safety and marine sanitation equipment. I spelled it wrong, so I'm reading it wrong. Requirements are now considered secondary offense, so they can't be stopped for that reason. And then apparently there's going to be a Florida Freedom Boater decal. And the FWC and Department of Highway Safety will issue a decal for boaters who demonstrate compliance with safety equipment restrictions, which I think is good to have.
Right.
I never thought that there was law enforcement jumping on people's boat for no probable cause.
I imagine there is. I was my old criminal defense background, is sparked by that, because I'm sure there would be. For that to have been pushed by somebody to get that legislation passed, there must be some issue where there were concerns from people that are boating, and that they really don't want to be scrutinized unnecessarily. Which I mean, I can imagine that there'll be reasons to scrutinize people, but under our system, typically there should be a real basis, which is what probable cause is for, before a law enforcement person actually can require you to make your place available type things.
Right. Now,
years ago, I can remember getting stopped just for that reason, just a random stop to make sure you had enough life preservers and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that would be, personally, I think that's a good thing to do. Yeah. But if this law is saying you can't do that, just to make sure that you have life preservers.
Right.
Enough people. But I don't know. Maybe if I was more of a boater,
we really don't know actually what was the particular concern. There must have been something that concerned people to actually pass a law on that, because on the surface, we're not knowing ourselves.
Well, while we're talking about boaters, we had this horrible accident that happened with the Clearwater ferry and the boater. I saw on the news last night that one of the families have filed a lawsuit against not only the boat operator, but also I believe it's the company that owns the boat.
Okay.
Which happens to be his family as well. I think it's called Mad Toys LLC. Okay. And so we have just about a minute left, filing a lawsuit against them. They're seeking wrongful death damages because one of the family members died.
Yes.
Can you just briefly tell what kind of damages that they'd be seeking for, and accountability and stuff? Right.
So in this situation, we think I was on with Jacqueline at some point when this initially happened, and there's discussion about it because the issue becomes negligence.
Right.
So the family is suing because they believe they have that evidence. And in that situation where the person was killed, then the damages for the spouse, for children, would be pain and suffering, basically.
Yeah, so it's pain and suffering. And they're suing the owner, too, because they said that the driver never should have been driving.
Yeah.
Lorrie, it was fun.
All right.
6 months from now, we'll have new laws. We'll talk about those, too. But next week, I'll be back to talk about FLA law on the radio. We're going to have some rainy days here, so I encourage everyone to drive safely and watch out for those who don't. Thank you for listening to us. I'll be back next week. Take care.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.